Hey 7th graders, welcome to video number 2 for your final exam study guide. We went through questions 1 through 14 in the first one. This one will be 10 minutes. We'll see how long it goes. So we're looking at question 15. How is farming unnatural? Remember, we as humans choose what goes in that ground. Food doesn't really ever grow naturally anymore. Wheat doesn't naturally grow in the Great Plains. Corn doesn't naturally grow in the Great Plains. Soy doesn't naturally grow. Peanuts, none of this stuff naturally grows where it does now. We choose where it goes. We also choose the water sources. We're the ones that impact how much water and fertilizer they get. Right there, we choose the chemicals that treat the crops. We change the soil and the landscape to farm. We have 100% impact on what grows where and where animals graze. That's just straight up. Provide 3 examples of why Renaissance art was different than Middle Ages art. Well, Middle Ages art was middle-aged. Remember, Renaissance art was much more realistic. Okay? There were shadows, the figures were in action, colors were more vibrant and lighter. Figures were drawn 3-dimensionally, and they were actually drawn to scale. Whereas you remember that picture in the Middle Ages where the guys are standing in front of the castle and they're bigger than the entrance to the door. I guess they were like 30 feet tall. I don't know. Often Renaissance art is nude, not necessarily stiff standing. They're pretty much always in movement and in motion. They're all drawn to scale and 3-dimensional. 3-dimensional's up there twice. And unlike the Middle Ages, the art isn't always about religion. Most of the Middle Ages art was about the church. It was a way of teaching people the Bible because most people couldn't read back then. But remember, the Renaissance was a rebirth. Oh, look, that's the next question. The Renaissance was a rebirth or revival of art and literature. And so it was a time where people wanted to be more interested in learning, in studying, and in knowing why the things are the way they are. Remember humanism? Understanding the whys about the whys. So that's what Renaissance means, a rebirth or revival of arts and literature. The Black Death, one of my favorite units of the year, killed nearly a third of Europe, proved that the church really didn't have any answer at all because it really just didn't know what was causing all these deaths. Remember, it was the rats. Villages were completely devastated, serfs died, and other people of other jobs died. And because of that, people starved. You had all these serfs who were farmers, they're dying. Therefore, no food, therefore people die. The Black Death led to the end of the Middle Ages because now life needed to change. Life didn't revolve around the church because the church didn't have any answers, which it's kind of funny because that's question number 19. The church and the plague. The church didn't have the answers as to why people were dying. You need to pray more, and that way your friends won't die from the Black Death. That didn't work. They died. These doctors, they didn't know anything. They didn't understand that when you cut people to bleed them, you weren't getting their bad blood out. You were literally killing them. And these doctors that look like penguins, they didn't know anything. So remember, stay away from rats. I took off this question from the test. You're welcome. You want to be a knight? Be a knight. The caste system or the caste system, that hierarchy in India by the Hindus. Remember, people could be born into a certain social status and then you remained in that social status your entire life. It was very difficult, if almost impossible, for upward mobility. And there was that bottom group called the untouchables that were born into poverty-stricken just horror, and that was it. So it's a social system. It doesn't exist in India anymore, but it existed for thousands of years. Johannes Gutenberg, one of my faves, he invented the printing press. Well, with an asterisk. He didn't invent the printing press. He invented a movable printing press where you could move the numbers and the letters in a more efficient fashion. Now, you don't have to handwrite all the books. Now, you can take the ink and you can put it on the letters and you can press the paper, the parchment, against the actual the letters and the paper. You pressed it into paper. So now, books are more affordable. People can buy books because they're cheaper to make. Easier to print means the cost goes down. Since you can print more books, more people have access to them. Since more people have access to books, more printed knowledge. And now the civilians can be educated. People are focusing less on religion. People are now wanting to learn and move up in the social status. They wanted, it was a thirst for knowledge. People yearned for books every couple of months in the Middle Ages. You guys have a new website like every 5 seconds. We got 2 triangles of hierarchy here for feudalism, and we've got for the church. Let's see if I can zoom in. Booyah. All right. Feudalism in the Middle Ages. The king was at the top, me. You had nobles and other church officials, those that worked for the church and worked for the king. Basically, the administration, they worked for me. And then you had the knights and vassals, the PE department and math teachers. And then you had the serfs, those that were at the bottom of the barrel, you guys. So that's what you got. The king, the nobles, the knights and the vassals, and the serfs. 90% of all the people in the Middle Ages were serfs. Let's go ahead and on over. Look at the Catholic Church. At the top, you have the Pope. Below, you have the St. Louis Cardinals. Cardinals could eventually become popes. Archbishops, which could eventually become cardinals. Then you have bishops. Bishops were in charge of churches and regions. Priests who ran daily services in the churches. And then it should say Catholics and nuns. It should say monks and Catholics and nuns. So that's what you got there for the hierarchy. We're going to get to a couple more questions. Who was the leader that brought castles to England from France? William the Conqueror. When William the Conqueror came from England and stormed, when he conquered all of Normandy, he came on in and was like, you guys want some castles? Here's some castles. You guys want me to take over Normandy? I'll take over Normandy. I mean, he straight up was the military general of the Middle Ages. He is the one that spread all of this culture from Normandy. The Crusades that happened at the end of the Middle Ages, the purpose of the Crusades fought between, by the way, question number 27, Christians and the Muslims are fighting over the Holy Land. They're going to Israel. They're fighting over Israel. They're fighting over all of the land in Israel. And so they're trying to take back this Holy Land. And yes, Jews still lived in that part. So it was one of those things where it was a difficult fight for hundreds of years over Israel. Shifting gears big time, the scramble for Africa. Remember, after our nationalism unit, in the late 1800s, European nations wanted more natural resources. And so they looked at Africa, and they looked at Africa as primitive, meaning people who were not necessarily as developed, but there were a series of significant natural resources there. There was a meeting in 1884 in Berlin where these larger European nations like Germany, France, and Great Britain and Belgium, they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go into Africa. They looked at the map of Africa and created borders where the nations would and would not take over areas. So that the map was drawn up to prevent nations from stepping on each other's boundaries and get basically taking over areas to which other people lived or were trying to conquer. In some cases, especially in the Democratic Republic of the Congo area, is that Africans were forced to work, their hands sometimes cut off, or even killed if they failed to produce these resources for the Europeans. It was terrible. There are some contributing factors to World War I. We had nationalism, the rise of one thinking that your country is superior to another country, the idea that your people are superior to other people. It's extreme patriotism and fanaticism. Imperialism is a contributing factor to World War I. Remember the scramble for Africa and the idea of going outside of the mainland of where you live, colonizing new areas, and then trying to take them under your wing as a country. Militarism. All of these nations in the late 1800s in Europe are starting to create these massive militaries for defensive purposes, but also some are thinking about maybe invading other lands and taking over other areas. And so the rise of massive militaries. Secret alliances, because now some of these countries are talking to each other and saying, hey, look, I got your back. If something happens, make sure you get my back. And when World War I started, people didn't realize, oh, you guys are friends with them. Oh, y'all are friends with them. Oh, y'all are friends with them. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh man, everyone's declaring war on each other because they're all friends with each other and they didn't realize it. And then finally, in June of 1914, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated. And then it was like, all right, now it's you declare war on you, you declare war on you, we're declaring war on you, we're declaring war on you. And it just kept going, and that was that. I'm going to stop us there because I want to keep these videos about 10 minutes long. So there are questions 15 through 29. All right. Enjoy.